When David met Claire, it was on one of those rainy evenings where the world seems to pause, where the streets glisten like glass, and every raindrop feels like a tiny echo of something bigger. He'd just come out of the bookstore, clutching an old novel he didn't need, when she bumped into him, nearly sending it tumbling into a puddle. Her laughter, light and unguarded, filled the quiet street. She apologized, offered him a tissue, and somehow didn't leave. That's how it began, two strangers under a flickering streetlight, sharing small talk about rain and paperbacks. David used to say later that she wasn't someone who entered a room. She arrived like a melody that makes you stop mid-thought. Years passed, and they built a life that was ordinary in all the beautiful ways. Burnt toast mornings, mismatched mugs, shared playlists in the car. They weren't perfect. No couple is. They fought over bills, over time, over silly things, like whose turn it was to fold the laundry. But every fight ended with the same phrase, her quiet whisper, "We're okay." Those words became their rhythm, their heartbeat. Even in silence, he'd feel them, "We're okay." Then came the diagnosis. It was supposed to be nothing. Just a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. But life doesn't always come with warnings. The doctor's words cracked something inside him that day. Stage 4, he remembered hearing, but the rest blurred, as if time had turned into fog. Claire, though she didn't flinch. She smiled, squeezed his hand, and said softly, "Then let's live while we can." And she meant it. For months, she made him see the world again. They watched sunrises from their porch, drove to the coast, danced in their living room when the chemo made her too weak to walk outside. There were moments of fear, of course, nights when he'd sit by her bed, watching her chest rise and fall, terrified of the moment it might stop. One evening, as she sat wrapped in a blanket, she looked at him and said, "Do you know what scares me most?" He shook his head, "That you'll stop living when I do." He didn't answer then. He couldn't, because deep down he knew she was right. As the months passed, the house began to feel heavier. The laughter dimmed, replaced by the quiet hum of machines and the scent of medicine. But even then, she found small ways to bring light, painting her nails bright yellow, leaving him notes on sticky paper, scribbled with phrases like "You're my calm in the storm" or "Remember to breathe." And then, one night, it happened. The nurse had just left. The rain had started again, soft against the window. David sat beside her, holding her frail hand, tracing the lines he'd memorized over decades. Her eyes fluttered open. There was pain, yes, but also peace, like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. "Claire," he whispered, "I'm here." Her lips moved, forming words barely above a breath. "Promise me. You'll live." 3 words. That's all. "You'll live." He froze, trying to process them as tears blurred his vision. She smiled just barely, and then she was gone. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was absence. The kind that seeps into every corner of your being. For days he couldn't move, couldn't eat. The world outside continued, cars passing, people laughing, but it all felt like a distant planet. He'd wake up expecting to hear her humming from the kitchen, to find her slippers by the bed. Instead, he found only emptiness. But one morning, as he reached for her old sweater draped on the chair, a note fluttered out from the pocket. It was one of her yellow sticky notes. The ink was smudged, but the words were still clear. "When I'm gone, find the light again. It's still there, waiting for you." He sat there for hours, holding that note. It was then that her last words began to make sense. "You'll live." She hadn't meant it as a plea. It was a command born of love and instruction on how to honor what they'd built. That night, he did something he hadn't done since she passed. He opened the window. The air was cold, the moon distant, but as the wind brushed against his face, he felt something shift. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was a beginning. In beginnings, no matter how small, are where healing starts. If you've ever lost someone who felt like home, you know that the world doesn't stop for grief. It just becomes quieter until you find your way back to it. David would. 2. The days that followed were slow, almost painfully so. Grief has its own clock, and it never moves in sync with the rest of the world. Some mornings, David couldn't get out of bed. Other days, he found himself walking aimlessly through the park, clutching Claire's note in his jacket pocket like a lifeline. The ink had begun to fade, but the words find the light again never lost their weight. He began small. He started with her garden. The roses had withered since she'd gone, but he knew how much she'd loved tending to them. So he picked up her gloves, still carrying faint traces of her perfume, and began to dig. Each petal that bloomed that spring felt like her whispering, "You're doing it. Love, Dot, it wasn't easy." Healing never is. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when he'd set 2 plates for dinner out of habit, or catch himself reaching for her side of the bed. But every time he felt like sinking again, he'd remember her voice. Soft and steady, "Promise me you'll live." And so, he tried. He volunteered at the community library, the same one she used to visit every weekend. He read to children in her favorite section, the corner by the old window where the afternoon light poured in. The first time he did it, he could barely speak without his voice breaking. But with each story he told, something inside him began to mend. Months passed, and though the ache never truly vanished, it softened. He began to laugh again, small, hesitant laughs at first, then real ones. He started going to the cafe where they'd first met, always ordering her favorite tea. The barista, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed one day and said, "You must have loved her deeply." He smiled. "Still do." One evening, while walking home, he stopped under the same flickering streetlight where it had all begun. The rain was falling just like that night years ago. And for the first time since she'd left, he didn't feel her absence like a wound. He felt it like warmth, a quiet presence that lived within him. Looking up at the gray sky, he whispered, "I'm living, Claire, just like you wanted." And in that moment, it wasn't just a whisper into the wind. It was a promise fulfilled, because love, the kind that survives goodbye, never really ends. It simply changes form, turning from touch into memory, from presence into light. And though Claire was gone, her 3 final words kept echoing softly in his heart, guiding him through every new day. "You'll live," and he did.